But we're in the midst of our study of Deuteronomy. We're in Deuteronomy, the 14th chapter. We're in this fourth lesson, and we will complete that and go hopefully get into the fifth lesson. We may not make that, but we'll try. When we look at the different laws, you say, well, why should I be studying that? I think you would enjoy studying the Bible and realize here were some principles laid down by God. It's God's mind to his people. And he had to deal with the people not just on a spiritual level as far as their kingdom is concerned, but it was a kingdom here upon this earth. They had to have walls to protect them. They had to have laws to keep them clean. They had to have laws in order to be just. And we see the mind of God working, even though these laws don't apply to us today. We just got through studying in our last class lesson of the meats that are clean and unclean. You can go to a health magazine, you're going to see that the foods that God said are not clean are not good for you. Is shrimp good for you? You know what they eat on. You know where you get them out of the water. And what did God say? Only those that have fins and scales. Does a shrimp have fins and scales? It's called a shellfish. No, it doesn't. And there were health magazines that say, you know, you get parasites, they eat off dead animals in the bottom, and I say that so I could get more shrimp for myself maybe. But we don't live under that law, but there may be some of those animals, like a bat, and the pagans around you are boiling a kid in its mother's milk in verse 21. Why is that put there when, you can give things to foreigners? Because that's what they did. And God said, no, my people are not going to do that. And so from the standpoint of following his wisdom, you might have been a healthier person. But God has said all meats are clean today. Do we eat pork? They were not able to eat pork. And there's your white meat. And there's it's protein. But it may be not the cleanest thing to eat. You'll have to make that decision. But we don't have laws governing that. But it's interesting that things that would have parasites upon it, those things that might not be healthy to the people of that day, they were to stay away from that. And in order to be a separated people, even their diet. So we talked about the meat, the beast, and the idea of the fish, and the idea of the birds. You're not to eat a buzzard. Do you want to eat a buzzard? Not really. But there's a lot of uncleanliness in the sense of health risks that we might run into, and it's dealing with our diet. But God doesn't look at it that way. He says, follow me. Follow me. Do what I say. And there will be blessings that come from that when we follow exactly what he teaches us to do. So we come to chapter 14 and verse 22, that of tithing. Here again, God does not command us to tithe, to give a tenth of all we have, but they had to tithe every year. And a lot of times, and when the third year came along, that tithe was rolled in to a third tithe, to a tithing of the third year. And we'll see that in this same context. But they were to tithe year by year. Thou shalt surely tithe all the increase of thy seed, that which cometh forth from the field year by year. And thou shalt eat before Jehovah thy God in the place which he shall choose. This will become very important in the next chapter. And you say, well, why does he keep emphasizing that? Because he hasn't done that in Leviticus. He hasn't done that in Exodus. What were the people doing when the law was given from Mount Sinai? Were they already in their houses in the promised land? No. And they would be wandering in the wilderness. But when they came to their land, things are going to be different. There's going to be a place where you're going to have these feast days. And we'll see that hopefully before this class period is over. But we start with this question. What were the children to do with the tithes when they were too far away from the place God chose to carry them? What were they to do? They had to, look what they had to tithe. Thou shalt eat before Jehovah thy God in the place where he shall choose, verse 23, to cause his name to dwell there, the tithe of thy grain, and of thy new wine, of thine oil, and the firstlings of thy herd, and of thy flock, that thou mayest learn to fear Jehovah thy God always. You're going to eat these things. Well, why does he say wine? When he says, I need grain, and there's the oil that comes from the olive, but there's the firstings of thy herd, and all these things are connected with that. Why does he say the new wine? Is that old wine? New wine is not fermented. In fact, in Isaiah 65 and verse 8, the new wine is in the cluster of the grape. They may be tithing clusters of grapes. Not let's make some wine and get a tenth of it. It's the field. It's coming from the field. It's what they tithe. And it will produce the grape juice, which is the new wine. And there's what we see that's taking place. So what happens, you have firstings of a flock, and you've got a long way to travel. What could they do? What does God allow them to do? Take their money, wrap it in their hand, take their money, and they can purchase what they need for sacrifices when they get to that place. There was a point of convenience for them. But it was something that God authorized, not what Jeroboam does, and dealing with Rehoboam and so forth. So we see that that's the way. Is it too long for thee? Thou art not able to carry it because the place is too far from thee. Verse 25, then thou shalt turn it into money and bind up the money in thy hand and shall go to the place where Jehovah the God that shall choose. You'll see that that's probably in the temple area. And thou shalt bestow the money for whatsoever thy soul desireth. Now here's what he says he desires. Oxen, sheep, wine, or what? What does your Bible say? Does it say shikar? Or does it say strong drink? Which is it? You want to drink strong drink? Here's your passage. Is it? You can purchase for what? Strong drink, for whatsoever thy soul asketh for thee, and thou shalt eat it, therefore, before Jehovah thy God, and shalt rejoice, thou and thy household. Yeah, rejoicing, because my spirits are lightened, because I have strong drink. And I can purchase that with money when I come to offer my tithes. I think you can see why this might be a convenient passage for those who believe you can drink wine today. You want to make an argument? Well, not strong drink. We'll talk about grape juice. I can talk about that new wine. We'll make the point about that. But here in Deuteronomy, the 14th chapter, he speaks about strong drink and what my soul desires. And I eat it, therefore, before Jehovah. And it's connected with the oxen, it's connected with all the sacrifices. What could be connected with the sacrifices and it's strong drink that you never drink? You never drink it. What is it? It's the drink offering. Turn with me to Numbers, the 28th chapter, and verse 7. When he speaks about the drink offering, listen to what it's comprised of. And the drink offering thereof shall be the fourth part of a hin for the one lamb in the holy place, that would be in the temple area, that's where we're heading. Shalt thou pour out the drink offering of what? Strong drink. It's a drink offering. You pour it out. You don't digest it. That's the problem. But that is a passage that Christians, members of the church, go to that say strong drink's okay. Just don't get drunk. I want you to know what it was. And you go to the New Testament, Paul says, I'm glad I'm a drink offering poured out. I'm dying. I'm pouring out. Drink offerings were all poured out. They were not, you didn't drink them. You poured it out of the lamb sacrifice. And it was comprised of strong drink. That's what you could do with strong drink. They're taking money and buying things connected with their sacrifices. Now, so they'd have a good old time in their journey to Jerusalem. And this is why we study the Bible. This is why we study our Old Testaments. to realize that this is where people want to go, and this looks good. Your soul desires it. You can take money, and if he said that, and you could digest that and strong drink, why are you condemning me drinking a little beer? Because strong drink was never authorized by God for God's people to drink. Never. And the wine and so forth could be preserved, and we see all those things that happen in their society. You were a glutton if you didn't cut the wine with water, so the alcoholic content was reduced so much. You were just a glutton. You were a foreigner. You're just a behemoth. And those things need to be factored in of the time that we are living. So we're looking at ourselves, looking at a time past, and we're not under these laws. But this is where people go to establish their false doctrine. And when we are studying through the Bible, we just kind of pick up on some of that. And I hope that will be helpful. David, you have another point? That's right. Because it's not only condemning drunkenness, the idea of what kind of leads up to it. I remember Osby making this point in Ephesians 5 that be not drunken with wine was an inceptive verb. He used the word inceptive. That means it's in the process of becoming drunk that Paul is condemning. But I know at least you're not to come under that control of that in that passage, under the control of wine. And what happens when we just start drinking? We're in that process of being controlled, and what may be not much for some is too much for others. And so there's the sense of, well, you can take wine. Doesn't mean it's strong drink necessarily, but you take wine for your stomach's sake. It's medicinal purposes. That Timothy was a teetotaler before that. He wasn't drinking anything. Why? Why? There's the influence of the Christian in our society. We're to be salt. We're to be a light to the world. We're to stop that evil that keeps coming, and we conduct ourselves accordingly. But what we're finding is that people want to look for things to justify what they really want to do. And that's a sad way to study the Bible, to try to look for something that proves you. Why not take what he says and look at, well, what do you mean by that? And realize truth doesn't contradict itself. In fact, I think it harmonizes itself real well here, don't you? Question number 16. What was to be done concerning the tithe of every 3 years? In broad terms of digesting these things, at the end of every 3 years, verses 20 following, what do you get from that to answer that question? Let me read it. At the end of every 3 years thou shalt bring forth all the tithe of thine increase in the same year, and shall lay it within thy gates. The Levite, because he hath no portion nor inheritance with thee, and the sojourner, and the fatherless, and the widow that are within thy gates shall come and shall eat and be satisfied, that Jehovah thy God may bless thee in all the work of thy hand which thou doest. Now, what do you take from that to answer this question? What was to be done concerning the tithe of every 3 years? Well, first year I'm going to do, I've got my schedule. First year of January, sometime I'm going to, or when spring comes, I'm going to give the tithe. I've got to do that every year. You know, he just said that earlier. And then the third year, I got to do that first, and then right after that, I got to do another tithe. What did he say? Take all the tithe, all of it. I think he's saying that you roll that tithe that you do every year into that third year. For the third year, what's it designed for? Just the Levites? That's true, Levites, but is it just the Levites? What do you take from that? Levites? Maybe some people who have need? Would that be something that takes all of them together? Is that something that would say, this Why the sojourner? And you'll also understand why the Levite. Levite did not have an inheritance. Who's taking, and the point you made is right. It's for them. We think of that all the time. But this tithe is included in them. And notice what he said in verse 27, just leading up to verse 28. He said, the Levite that is within thy gates, thou shalt not forsake him, for he hath no portion nor inheritance with thee. He's kind of like, in this, like a sojourner. He's kind of like fatherless. He's kind of like a widow. They may not have some needs. And in this tithe, where you're offering to God a tenth, and that's going to help supply the needs of the operating the sanctuary and so forth, and the sacrifices and all those things, the Levite needs to be taken care of. And that third year tithe, included him. And maybe that was really being emphasized. And your point made is for the Levites. Verse 27, so it's for the Levite. And he says it again in verse 29. But who does he include that helps us understand his point? They have no inheritance with us. They didn't have land to grow crops and that sort of thing that they're given unto them. And so they may have needs from time to time. So they were to take care of that. And what's interesting, that God may bless thee in all the work of thy hand which thou doest. What work are they doing? Well, they're growing crops to help others, aren't they? And that's what they're doing. And God will bless your... Yeah, why don't you just give them food? He said, you work. And he will bless the hand which thou doest. So, any questions on chapter 14? What was to be done with that third tithe? Some say, well, they had to do two tithes there. I think when he says all the tithe, you just roll it up into one, and here's just how we're going to, every third year, we're going to be taking care of the needy within our gates, and that included the Levites. All right? Question number 4. What is to be done every 7 years regarding lenders who lent their brethren out to lend to their brethren among the children of Israel? Now we're going into 7 years. And what were they to do? Forever? See, I read this sometimes, I think of Jubilee. Jubilee was every 50 years. This isn't it. But it is releasing the debt for that year. What also is happening every 7 years? Come with me to Leviticus, the 25th chapter. In verses 1 through 7 of Leviticus, he says, speaking of the children of Israel, verse 2, and say, when you come to the land which I give you, then shall the land keep a Sabbath. How long is Sabbath? On the seventh day, he shall keep a Sabbath unto Jehovah. 6 years shalt thou sow thy field, and 6 years shalt thou prune thy vineyard, and gather in the fruits thereof. But in the 7th year shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath unto Jehovah. Thou shalt neither sow thy field, prune thy garden, which thou groweth of itself, of thy harvest thou shalt not reap, and the grapes of thy undressed vine, you're not going to dress it, you're not going to reap it, you're not going to gather it into your barn. But it shall be a year of solemn rest, and the Sabbath land shall be food for you, but you're not going to gather it into your barn. It's food for you, for your servant, for your maid, for your hired servant, and for the stranger who sojourn with thee, and for thy cattle, and for the beasts that are in thy land, and all the increase thereof be for food. But you're not going to gather it. It's the land is going to lay fallow. You're not going to work it or anything like that. It was a Sabbath 7 years where you let the land rest for a year. I think they're doing that with this debt too. That in the 7th year, you were not to require that debt to be paid that year. Not that it was to be released forever, 50 years, you got another point. I mean, there's the release there we don't find there. But notice in verse 8 of Leviticus 25, the number of established years, 7 times that, there'll be your Jubilee. But this one is dealing with the release, what you've lent, so which you have lent unto your neighbor, he shall not exact of his neighbor and his brother, because Jehovah's release hath been proclaimed. You're to release that, let it sit for a year, I think is what he is saying. Of a foreigner thou mayest exact it. You can demand it on that 7th year. But whatsoever is thine and thy brother, thy hand shall release for that year, just like the land is released for that year. Howbeit there shall be no poor with thee, for Jehovah will surely bless thee in the land which Jehovah thy God giveth thee for inheritance to possess it. So there are not going to be any poor people there, but you're going to read in the next few verses that you're going to have poor people. That's not a contradiction. It's trying to get, what are we understanding here? The guy that you were lending money to, who's poor, he's still going to be poor. He's still going to need something. And that leads us to the point, well, I'm not going to exact it that year, but what about this? What base thought might arise that Moses addresses? And the word base doesn't mean it's evil. It doesn't mean it's sinful. It means it's worthless. You're not helping. And that doesn't mean it's not sinful, but the word itself means you're worthless. It's Belial. You're worthless. It's a worthless idea, a worthless thought, because it won't help anything. So what's that base thought? What's his base thought? He tells you, verse 9, beware that thou be not a base thought in thy heart, saying, the 7th year, the year of release is at hand, and thine eye be evil against thy poor brother, and thou give him naught. What base thought are we talking about? Okay, connect those 2 dots for me. It's the 7th year, and I'm a good Jew, and I'm going to do what? I'm going to obey the 7th year, which is what? I'm not going to exact my money from you, poor man. But the base thought is, I'm not going to do anything for you. You're worthless. It doesn't help. And could you see someone thinking that? Take away the good Jew. Hey, I'm not getting money from him this year anyway. Let him go. Forget about him. No. We will not have any poor in Jerusalem, though we've got them. So what makes it we don't have any poor in verse 4? We help them. It's the 7th year. I don't have to, he's not giving me any money. He has needs. He has needs. So we continue to read. And he says in verse 10, thou shalt surely give him, and thy heart shall not be grieved when thou givest it, begrudgingly. I'm not getting payment back from you, what you owe me, and therefore I'm doing this grudgingly. No, you're not going to be grieved when thou givest him, because that for this thing Jehovah thy God will bless thee in all thy work and all that thou puttest thy hand to. For the poor will never cease out of the land. Well, verse 4, you just say, there shall be no poor with thee. Because even when we're allowing the land to go fallow, we're not exacting debts for that 7th year from people apparently who were poor that needed a loan. Even in that year, when the poor are needing help, we will take care of them. What do you need? Different from the debt you owe me. I think that's what he's talking about. It'll never cease out of the land. Therefore I command thee, saying, thou shalt surely open thy hand and thy brother to the needy, and to thy poor in thy land. I did that because I didn't exact the money from you. And God's not going to be pleased with that. He's not going to be pleased with that. Yes, sir. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Jubilee, you're to release it. That's when everybody's debt was released, and it says so. This one doesn't say that it was released forever. And I'm saying, was the land released forever? 1 year. And that was connected with the following land that was connected. This was a particular law there. Now, you may be right, but what I have written before me doesn't say that I will never have to give it, because that means that why would you ever lend to anybody? Lending was to be paid back. Then you wouldn't have any lending taking place, because every 7 years we're going to start all over again. And you'll see the hired servant, how long they would work before they were released. And I'm not disagreeing with that. That may be true. I'm just offering you what I think it's teaching. And I have scripture to support it. I just had the scripture, and I went through every part. And how come you'll never have the poor with you? Why that verse? I think my answer supports it. How would you never have any poor with you? Well, I don't think you'll have, after 7 years, you're not going to have any poor. They're going to start over again. Okay. I got your point, and it's valid. Thank you for bringing it up. But well, you threw it out, and I understand it. I'm just trying to say I don't agree with that. I used to, but don't. Yes, sir. How was the poor, well, release your debt, so I'm going to go buy me some land. Well, I can't work it today, this year. But there was food out in that land where they could go get, didn't they? They would be taken care of, and there may be other needs. And so at least the seventh year, they were not exacting the debt. And maybe what David says, we'll do it, and then by the time we get to the 50th year, we're going to do it again. That's another special time, that we'll never have any poor with us, but yet we do have them with us all the time. And therefore, this is the system that they had. And whether this particular 7 years, no more debt, and then what do the poor do? They go and do better. I don't know. But you're not to have any in your gates, and yet you got them have them. You'll have them all the time. But this seventh year is that, and this is the background. This is not the legislation for it. This is the background in which someone might have a base thought. It is the seventh year, and I don't have to take care of the poor, because the poor are being taken care of this year. Even in that seventh year, what were they to do? Help them. They can't exact their debt, but they could help them. So that's why they don't have poor in their gates. But the next year, it doesn't say they're going to go back and have to pay their debt. It doesn't say that. Jubilee, I think, lays your point down. But that's 50 years. This is connected with the Sabbath of the land. And the poor would be very much connected with that land. And I think that's why he brings it here. But you've heard, and both of them are good. Well, mine not necessarily good. His is good. And I offer mine based upon exegetical study of that text. And that's, but I may have missed something somewhere else. So we'll continue through Deuteronomy. But you know what the base thought is? The poor are being released. I don't have to help them. Did we agree on that? You're going to have to help them. Don't hold your hand tight. Even in time of releasing debt, they still may need some help. and you be there to help them. All right? Question number 19. What was to be done in the 7th year to a slave among God's people who had served 6 years? What's to be done there? Let's look at verse 12. If thy brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, be sold unto thee and serve thee 6 years, then in the 7th year thou shalt let them go free from thee. And when thou lettest him go free from thee, thou shalt not let him go empty. Thou shalt furnish him liberally out of the flock, out of the threshing floor, out of the winepress. As Jehovah thy God hath blessed thee, thou shalt give unto him. And thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in Egypt, and so forth. Now, to David's point, were they only those to be done there in every 6 years? They serve thee for 6 years, and that 7th year, or in that 6 years, going into the 7th year, that they're released and they had to be back being a slave again? No. But they could stay on if they want to, as we shall see. But they were to put about their neck, literally the Hebrew, put about their neck, not go empty. Give liberally out of thy flock, your threshing floor, the winepress. Jehovah hath blessed thee and given thee unto him, and thou shalt remember that was a bondman. So take care of his needs, even though you're sending him away. And again, taking care of the people, and you're releasing him and her. And it shall be, it shall be, if he said unto thee, I will not go out from thee, they were to do these things. But look at verse 18. It shall not seem hard unto thee when thou lettest him go free from thee. For what? For to the double of the hire of a hireling hath he served thee 6 years. Who's a hireling? You give him a job. He's not a slave. You're paying him. Does the Bible help us understand how long a hireling worked? How he was obligated to work? Turn with me to Isaiah 60. Well, there's other places, but Isaiah 16 and verse 14. Maybe we can, it can help us. Isaiah 16 and verse 14, what God means here. He said, now Jehovah has spoken, saying, within 3 years, as the years of a hireling. How long is a hireling to work for you? How long is this servant work for you? Double. Double of a hireling. And don't begrudge him leaving. If you hired a man, he's worked double for you. If you hired a man, he worked for 3 years. Now they have to work 3 years. You've done double. You've been blessed. He's worked for you how long? And you just provide for his needs? You didn't pay him the wage that a hireling would have? He's blessed you. Let him go. Let him go. And I think that's what he means by the double. So to the double of the hire of a hireling. He's worked 6 years for you. And serve thee. And Jehovah thy God will bless thee in all that thou doest. So there again, this time frame. We've got a 7th year of background, the ground, in my view, not allowing the debt to give the freedom of the debt for that year. And then the 6 years of letting a slave, whether it's a male or a female, to leave. And so we see they've served these 6 years, and you're to give them abundantly, liberally. And it's just interesting how God wants us when we give, cheerfully and liberally. The principle doesn't change. Don't do it begrudgingly. We've seen that in this chapter, and I hope that we'll keep that in mind, because that's the principle for today. What is to be done to the servant who desired to serve yet more? That he was, and why would he want to serve more? You want to get out of that, don't you? What caused him to want to serve more? Man or woman? I will not go out from thee because he loveth thee, and thy house because he is well with thee. We got to make, we don't, I don't know if any of us have household servants that live with us. In the Greco-Roman world, and even in the times of the Old Testament, when you spoke to households, you spoke to husband, wife, children, and slaves, and servants. And that's how the New Testament, Ephesians and Colossians, it's written to households. And well, we don't have slaves, so that doesn't work with us. Well, it does. There's some principles about those things. But the point is that they might like that. How do we look at slavery? That's a touchy subject. But you got to look at the Greco-Roman world in these times. It wasn't based upon race or color. It had a limited time frame of service. It wasn't that you stole somebody from a country to make them a slave. A lot of times they were trying to pay their debts. And there were times when, with masters who were serving God, they didn't want to leave that house. Does that mean slavery is good? No. Does that mean the New Testament condones slavery? No. It tells you how Christians to live in those conditions. That's what we're interested in. How do I live in difficult circumstances? As Peter says, to the froward you serve them. So what happened in our country, you look at the writings of the Civil War, period of time, there were churches saying slavery is authorized by God. And they'll go to the same passages that just tell you how you live in it to say is authorized. Don't believe that. But the slavery was different. At least acknowledge that. And wonder why they might want to stay. They just loved your family. And so, nope, got to clean house every 6 years. No, if that happens, what were they to do? And this may keep you from doing it, I don't know. What were you to do? Take an awl, take your ear, put it against a wooden post, and you get your ear pierced. No big deal. I've had my ear pierced all the time. What's a big deal? But that's what they were to do. And they were to serve them from now on. Some of the other passages say when you go to the judges and you make sure that this is all publicly set forth. Apparently by the time they enter into the land after the giving of the law, you don't find judges having to determine if it's right or wrong. It was what was happening of them. And so if it's hard for you to let him go, then you need to realize how much they blessed you. And you give them out abundantly, liberally, and you do so because you care about them and taking good care of them. Okay? Any questions or comments? Anything you want to say about slavery? It's the opportunity. All right, 21. What principle concerning sacrifices offered to God do you see in chapter 15 and verse 21? So here comes sacrifices we offer unto God. If it hath any blemish, or what? Lame or blind, any ill blemish whatsoever, thou shalt not sacrifice it unto Jehovah thy God. If I were to see, what principle is that? Why does he do that? It's a sheep, it's oxen. You're going to kill it. Why is that important with God? Yes, sir. And that's a principle. Of course, we can also see it typified who was coming, and that was Jesus. Was he without blemish? So the sacrifices were involved with that too. But I think that's the principle we get. We offer our best to God. And that's what we see. Now, he says in verse 22, thou shalt eat it within thy gates, the unclean and the clean alike, as the gazelle and as the hart. We saw this back in chapter 12. I know the comments were, this is talking about whether you're clean or unclean as a person. I do not agree with that. I'm talking zeal in the heart. It's clean, but it's unclean to offer unto God. So we're not talking about whether I'm clean, ceremonially clean, or unclean. And it wasn't talking about that back in chapter 12 either. It's in a context where the sacrifice is to be without blemish, but there are certain things you could eat because you desire it for food that you could not offer up on the altar. And we'll have to stop there. We'll pick that up, Lord willing, next time.